This is MiniDoc channel. Explore stories, discover truth. Stay tuned.
Welcome to The Debate. Our focus today lands directly on a passage that has, it's unsettled theologians and lay people alike for centuries. We're looking at the fierce indictment of spiritual mediocrity found in the book of Revelation, chapter 3. Specifically, the state described as having a lukewarm heart.
And this specific text, the one directed at the church in ancient Laodicea, it forces a really difficult comparison. We're examining the severe language used when analyzing commitment. That passage where being neither cold nor hot is met with this just incredibly visceral divine reaction.
Precisely. So the core question we have to wrestle with, drawing right from this material it's a provocative one, theologically and ethically. Is the state we call lukewarm Christianity actually worse than outright unbelief? This debate, it's going to center entirely on the interpretation of that scriptural passage. I'm going to argue that the unique dangers of lukewarmness, primarily deception, spiritual paralysis, make it a greater peril than outright rejection.
And I'm going to challenge that hierarchy, because while lukewarmness is clearly and severely condemned, I will argue that unbelief, the cold state, it has to remain the ultimate spiritual separation. The rhetorical heat reserved for the lukewarm doesn't change that. We have to decide what defines worse. Is it the nature of the offense or the ultimate consequence?
My thesis is firm, and it rests entirely on the language of rejection. Lukewarmness is worse than being cold because it represents a state of total spiritual uselessness combined with a profound self-deception. It provokes a really severe divine reaction, famously articulated as, "I am about to spit you out of my mouth."
That is undeniably strong language, visceral for sure. But let's clarify what this state actually is.
Right. So the lukewarm state, it attempts to possess the form of belief without the necessary function or, the passion of commitment. So it achieves neither the zealous effectiveness of being hot, committed, and active, nor the clear-eyed recognition of distance that comes with being cold. It's a hybrid. It's apathetic, maybe even hypocritical. The text singles this out because the state isn't just a lack of something, it's an active offense. The extremity of being violently rejected from the mouth, that demonstrates the exceptional danger of this specific condition compared to simple rejection. It's repellent because it offers impurity right where purity is expected.
Okay, I see why you emphasize the visceral nature of the rejection, but I come at it from a different angle, grounding the severity in fundamental theology. While the lukewarm state is, yes, clearly condemned, I still maintain that unbelief, the cold state, remains the primary and most severe spiritual state of separation. It is fundamentally a lack of a saving relationship, a lack of spiritual vitality.
But if cold is the absolute worst, why is the explicit active condemnation, the spitting, reserved only for the lukewarm?
Because the condemnation of lukewarmness is, in my view, primarily a functional critique. It's tied directly to the context of Laodicea. The city had sources of hot spring water, which was good for healing, and cold water imported via aqueduct, which was good for refreshment. Their local water, which traveled a long way, arrived tepid and full of minerals. It was useless, nauseating even. So the critique is about failing to serve a purpose, to refresh or to purify. And while this failure is offensive, it's a critique of utility, not necessarily a statement of greater moral or existential severity than the penalty for a total lack of relationship. The state of cold represents a fundamental spiritual death. So how can any degree of connection, even a flawed, nominal one, be worse than absolute, utter disconnection? Unbelief is the complete absence of life. It has to be the fundamental problem.
There's a compelling delineation, the functional versus the existential critique. I'll give you that. However, I think that distinction minimizes the moral offense that's embedded in the functional failure. Let's focus on that act of spitting out. I insist this action signifies a rejection based on the unique offense of insincerity or practical uselessness. This offense earns a unique type of condemnation, one that's different from the judgment awaiting the cold. The lukewarm have enough knowledge to adopt the label, but they lack the integrity to actually commit. They promised efficacy, they claimed the identity, and delivered nothing but a nauseating neutrality.
I'm sorry, I just don't buy that. I don't buy that the act of being spit out, even with its powerful local metaphor, implies a worse ultimate fate than the eternal consequences of outright unbelief. The metaphor is about utility. If you are cold, you have clarity, but you're still outside the saving relationship. If you are lukewarm, you claim to be in the relationship, but you just poison the waters. The text is indeed criticizing the failure to be beneficial. But is that practical failure genuinely worse than the complete forfeiture of saving grace that's inherent in the cold state? I think we're confusing a high degree of rhetorical disgust with a greater degree of ultimate spiritual guilt.
But the level of rhetorical disgust is the evidence of the hierarchy. If the spiritual condition is so abhorrent that it provokes a reaction of physical repulsion, a gag reflex, doesn't that inherently place it in a category of offense that supersedes a mere lack of relationship?
This is MiniDoc. We'll be right back shortly. This is MiniDoc channel. Welcome back.
It's not just that they are useless, it's that their uselessness is repulsive. Coldness might be an absence. Lukewarmness is a corruption.
Corruption is terrible, yes. But the greatest offense has to be separation from the source of life itself. Let's really dig into the spiritual condition of cold. If cold implies total separation and spiritual death, then it is, by necessity, the state of ultimate distance from the divine. Can you truly argue that a partial, deceptive life, which at least maintains some awareness of the spiritual claim, is worse than absolute death?
I can, and here's why. The passage frames cold as a state the speaker wishes the recipient would choose. I wish you were either cold or hot. That statement of preference is the critical turning point here. Why would you wish for coldness if it's the worst possible condition? It suggests that coldness, while resulting in separation, provides a stark clarity of position that is fundamentally preferable to the deceptive hybrid state of lukewarmness. The cold person is at least honest about their state. The lukewarm person is not.
That is a powerful line of reasoning, but I think the wish is purely utilitarian, not ethical. Perhaps it's a wish for a clear definition, like if you are not going to be committed and hot, at least be useful as an opposition, as cold. A clear boundary. The cold person doesn't claim to be a resource, the lukewarm person does, but fails. The frustration is with the wasted potential and the misrepresentation, not necessarily a reversal of the fundamental spiritual hierarchy where an absence of life is somehow better than a corrupted life.
Barrier. Lukewarmness lacks the honesty of coldness and the power of hotness. And that makes it a state of total loss of opportunity. The cold person knows they are outside. They know they need rescue. The lukewarm person believes they are inside, or, at least close enough, which halts any movement toward true change or repentance. That structural paralysis is the key to why it is worse.
You're shifting the debate now from the ultimate spiritual state to the process of conversion or repentance. I acknowledge the functional danger of self-deception, but we have to clarify, are we comparing the ultimate destination or the difficulty of the journey?
It has to incorporate both, because in the context of salvation, the means are inseparable from the end. The peril of the lukewarm heart lies exactly in its delusion. It believes itself saved or committed when it is not, and that prevents the necessary self-reckoning, the repentance, or the zealous change that defines true spiritual life. This structural lack of self-awareness makes lukewarmness functionally more dangerous than outright unbelief. The unbeliever, the one who is cold, is at least aware of their condition and their location relative to the commitment required.
I fully acknowledge the destructive power of self-deception. It is an enormous, maybe even insurmountable obstacle. However, we have to return to first principles of spiritual ontology. Separation from the divine, caused by fundamental unbelief, is, by definition, the worst spiritual state. While self-deception is a fatal obstacle, it's an obstacle within a flawed, nominal relationship that still retains some form of spiritual engagement, even if it's purely external. Unbelief, the cold state, is the absence of the relationship itself. Therefore, the consequence of that complete absence has to be intrinsically worse than the specific consequences reserved for failure within a nominal context.
But if the obstacle is absolute, if the deception guarantees the soul's destruction by eliminating the capacity for self-diagnosis, is that not worse than the initial condition of separation, especially if that initial condition is honest about itself? The cold state, knowing it lacks life, might seek it. The lukewarm state, believing it possesses life, never genuinely seeks it. So one state preserves the possibility of rescue through clarity, the other guarantees destruction through delusion.
You are elevating the behavioral barrier, the delusion, above the essential theological state, which is alienation. But the consequences of unbelief are ultimate and absolute. Eternal alienation. The consequence of lukewarmness, while severe and unique in its repulsive nature, doesn't necessarily equate to a worse existential fate than total unbelief. The text's intensity might just reflect the speaker's profound frustration with the potential that is not only wasted, but actively insulting because of its insincerity, rather than establishing a hierarchy of moral guilt, placing them below the utterly uncommitted.
I disagree fundamentally on the nature of that condemnation. The specific, unique, and visceral condemnation directed at the lukewarm in Revelation 3 highlights its unique threat. It is a spiritual condition defined by duplicity and spiritual paralysis, which the text treats as profoundly repellent. The lukewarm are repulsive because they insult the purity of the spiritual mission by offering an impure, useless mixture. That specific reaction suggests a level of offense that pure separation, pure coldness does not achieve. It isn't just about utility, it's about character and integrity.
Yet, we are still debating the nature of the condemnation rather than the nature of the state itself. The language of repulsion speaks strongly to utility and functional integrity. The cold person, by being honest about their distance, presents a clear spiritual challenge. The lukewarm person, by their dishonesty and functional failure, presents an offense. But the ultimate state of spiritual death is caused by unbelief, the cold condition. The debate really hinges on whether offense to utility and sincerity is worse than total existential alienation. I hold that absolute alienation is the worst state.
I think that's too neat a separation. The utility failure is the ethical failure here. When you claim commitment but refuse to pay the price of passion or zeal, you are committing a deep spiritual betrayal. Failure in function combined with self-deception is spiritually terminal, precisely because it eliminates the only path to correction. I stand by the text's visceral reaction as proof that the hybrid state of apathy and nominal commitment earns the sharpest rebuke and therefore is designated as the greater peril. It is the closest state to the required commitment that still fundamentally fails, which makes its rejection the most bitter.
And I reaffirm that while the lukewarm heart is a condemned and dangerous state, perhaps the most difficult one to escape, the ultimate distance and fate of the unbeliever remain the definition of the worst spiritual separation. The distinction is between the condition that causes the most disgust and the condition that causes the most permanent distance.
Clearly, both states are rejected in the source material with tremendous force and clarity, but with very distinct emotional and functional indictments.
And exploring this sharp difference in the nature of their condemnation, it illuminates the critical demand for genuine, fully engaged commitment. It forces us to confront not just the absence of life, but the debilitating quality of a compromised life.
Indeed. The challenge remains for the listener to contemplate the challenging implications of this assessment of spiritual priorities. Which is the greater peril? The clear path of alienation or the deceptive path of self-satisfied half-commitment? Thank you for joining us on The Debate.
Thank you for listening. This has been a MiniDoc channel. Explore stories, discover truth.
See you next time.